Earlier this month at the CES 25 event in Las Vegas, Nvidia set the rumours to rest with their latest and currently greatest RTX cards in the long Lumen 50 series announcement. In addition to the new cards though, Nvidia announced a new updated DLSS 4 Super Resolution, 4x frame generation, which is Blackwell cards only, and ray reconstruction update to their gaming tool suite. Although all the new cards vary in specs and performance levels, every RTX card, right back from the RTX 20 series upwards, supports the drastically upgraded DLSS 4 upscaler and ray reconstruction, now superseding the current DLSS 3 version. Now the big shift is more than just numbers. The team have moved away from the previous convolution neural network or CNN model that version used and onto a more precise, improved transformer neural model. But what does that mean in technical terms and in practice? Now, deep learning super sampling has been in use since the RTX was introduced in 2018, and it's been constantly updated every minute of the day on training servers which analyze ground truth images and retrain the models. See, add in new expected data results that are used within the DLSS model. Now, these are essentially data points predicted results based on millions and millions of test cases. The more they see and update, the better results are over time via new iterations in new DLLs or shipped within games. Now, bigger version increments offer more robust changes that may go beyond the base model, methods used, and final output results. Now, since version 1.0, we have seen great strides in image quality, stability, improved memory use, performance cost, and more. But after 6 years, this method has reached its natural limit of large-scale gains that come from simply adding more data to a fixed model, method, and compute method and budget. Now enter the Vision Transformer model, which changes, literally, all of this to a larger and more intense solution than before. Now essentially the prior method breaks down the frame into tiled section and analyzes the pixels therein along with motion vectors, color and depth buffers, neighboring pixels, and then calculates the final result on a per tile basis, frame to frame over multiple frames. The new Vision Transformer model uses a finer granular sample level, at the minimum 2x more taps over the previous CCN method, which provides a huge increase in data points to analyze each pixel, which increases over multiple frames. However, the biggest improvements are this model is quicker to teach, and this method no longer isolates each tile of the scene like the old CCN model. Now, each pixel that is sampled is collated into the overall model, analyzed across the entire frame, so it can better understand what the object within is. This means it now uses 4 times the amount of compute whilst focusing the work where it is required most. A planar service with a simple albedo map can be quickly processed with minimal effort, but a more difficult section, such as a reflection of 2 people against a billboard within a puddle, can have more weight placed on those areas, which results in a drastic increase in clarity, visibility, and stability within the image over the old CCN model that DLSS 1 to 3 used, and the ray reconstruction method benefits significantly from this. With the frame sampled as a whole, it means that the temporal quality from each frame is not only denser with greater details, but more coherent, as the entire image is now understood, rather than the disparate CCN method where each tile of the frame is treated independent from any other. And this is why we see a huge increase in temporal stability, image clarity, higher detail, and one of the biggest Achilles heels of DLSS 1 through 3, ghosting. Now, taking Hogwarts Legacy, which has been updated in our review period with DLSS 4, multiple frame generation and ray reconstruction, standing in the Great Hall with ray tracing on maximum, we can see that the ray trace stained glass window reflection on the ground is very noisy, unstable and broken up under DLSS 3's performance mode. And even with native 4K, the reflection and ground surface detail merges together and creates a blend of the glazed slabs and the reflection that can look soft, flicker and generally unstable, but it also smudges and blurs under camera motion. Now, moving to DLSS 4 in only its performance mode here, with ray reconstruction on, that same floor reflection and detail is now crystal clear and very obvious to see the distinction between the tiled floor surface, including the previously hidden surface details from the normal maps in the cracks and edges. The reflection now sits within the slab and tracks and contorts over the normals of that microfacet surface. This gives a clear, defined surface and reflection within that is far more physically accurate, easier to discern, and under motion no longer suffers from that same blurring, flicker and ghosting of the prior solution. And we see that across every object in the scene, including the table, the characters, and all shadows and objects now appear more stable, detailed, and overall of a higher resolution quality than they do in the previous mode, which even exceeds the native 4K version by a drastic amount. Now, much of the increase is from the ray reconstruction element, which also uses that new vision transformer model. This higher detail, clarity and stability with almost no fizzle or popping all comes from the same 1920 by 1080 base without frame generation enabled. Comparing an outdoor scene that can be a strain on all these solutions with alpha-tested grass, trees, reflections and sparse rendering elements, we can see that DLSS 4 not only maintains far more detail, both within the surface details such as those water bodies and reflections, having more detailed definition in those reflections, and even slightly improved texture clarity on the walls, but also within the geometry of the scene itself, with slightly less fizzle and shimmer on tree branches, specular on edges, hair strands against high contrast backgrounds, and far less ghosting and popping within the foliage and ambient occlusion. Comparing this through the current frame generation and image super resolutions competition in XeSS from Intel, FSR 2.1 from AMD, and even the much cheaper FSR 1 spatial upscaler, we can see vast differences between them. XeSS is by far the most unstable due to the sharpening filter, which can present slightly better detail or sharper grass and textures at times, even over DLSS 4, but this comes at the cost of stability, which is far worse than even FSR 2, which is more stable but very soft, suffering from a blurry image resolve over DLSS 3 and significantly over DLSS 4. Now, FSR 1 is not a temporal upscaler and is the noisiest solution of all, but even against FSR 2 and DLSS 3, DLSS 4 retains more detail in reflections, shadows, grass, textures, and offers more detail within the surface map, and is more stable both when static and under motion. It can reduce overbright areas as well, such as the owl plinth here, and across both indoor and outdoor test sections, it is superior to the native 4K image in all aspects, including performance and power usage. The visual gap reflects just how far ahead Nvidia's new solution is with image quality. A generation ahead, some might say. Cyberpunk 2077 is next. The team have added the new transformer model, including the new ray reconstruction and 4x multi-frame generation, alongside the old CNN version into their red engine. DLSS and MFG are key aspects if you want to enable all the goodies at a high frame rate. Now, we see similar detail and motion boosts, e.g. animated textures on screens and billboards, such as this Raiden-like faux arcade screen, highlighting the new solution can retain detail and minimize ghosting without motion vectors from within the animated textures, as it doesn't have any here to begin with. We can still see ghosting and flicker, but this is a difficult issue, and DLSS 4 is better than DLSS 3 at the balance of blurring versus clarity here. Now, ghosting was a big issue in this game, which can affect characters moving, objects like paper or cans rolling across the road, and even people walking past billboards or high contrast surfaces. Ray reconstruction does a great deal of the heavy lifting again here though, with reflections no longer suffering with breakup and less blurring, improved detail within that triangle intersection, and even shadows are more defined and stable with DLSS 4 over DLSS 3, and significantly so over XeSS and FSR 2 or 3, which the game supports both, as they can clump together under motion due to the grid-like sample pattern and excessive temporal data. DLSS 4 retains more granular detail with this ghosting and blobbing from the denoising. However, this was one area where I still saw some shadow ghosting and fizzle from the character shadows on the floor under DLSS 4. Now, this is likely related to the inherent engine techniques such as depth, temporal buffers, and the inherent rays per pixel they're built from. They are better and more stable than before, but noise and instability can still be seen under DLSS 4 in these and a few other areas within the game. Textures, for example, are lower than native 4K DLAA, and the difficult plastic orange Blade Runner-esque raincoat transparency here can still blend and ghost more under DLSS 4 and general image resolve, such as the thin wire mesh is very similar between DLSS 3 and 4, as the ray reconstruction is adding most improvements on AO reflections and GI. FSR 3 is the next best, with it resolving far more detail than FSR 2 and certainly XeSS, which is incredibly unstable, ghosting and flickering everywhere, specifically on that wire mesh. Another change is the ray reconstruction affects materials that interact with light, specifically in light scatter and diffusion, such as in skin. See, the roughness of the skin and tattoo on his chest are more prominent in DLSS 3 than 4, but with ray reconstruction disabled, the skin becomes too soft and loses most of that normal map detail in both. This can also happen on floors, as you see here, with the normal detail reduced under DLSS 4, but texture filtering also looks slightly lower here, and it may actually be a bug. You can see the improved light bounce and Fresnel edge light detail on the ground, the bottles, the chairs, etc., which is much better than all other solutions, including DLSS 3. As a boost, this isn't adding as much as Alan Wake 2 or Hogwarts, but DLSS 4 still improves on DLSS 3, which was already the better in the title overall. Now, Alan Wake 2 comparison is another perfect choice, as the game's inherent engine rendering artifacts can be a challenge for all solutions, due to the heavy use of sparse shading and the ray traced effects such as reflections and specifically global illumination, AO and shadows. This can break down and become unstable, fizzle and pop, like a breakfast cereal, even under DLSS 3. A big challenge for DLSS 3 has always been ghosting and geometry edges when moving or occluded and then disoccluded from behind other geometry, due to lack of temporal data between the frames and a trade-off with too much history which can increase blurring. The spinning fan shows this clearly, with the background edge of the beam remaining solid under DLSS 4 and not breaking down to reveal the base resolution underneath, but also leaving heavy dark streaks of the fan blades, which leaves a blurry ghosted image that ruins the image quality, and we can see this happening under DLSS 3 and FSR 2.2, which is the version used here. All these issues stand proud and cause heavy degradation of the image, which, although not fully resolved, is now only very minor and significantly more stable. Textures also benefit, with the wood grain of the tabletop now being significantly sharper, more vibrant and cleaner than on DLSS 3, which, without this side by side with DLSS 4, it still looked great on DLSS 3, but it suffers from a muddier, softer image that lacks high frequency detail. Now, FSR 2.2 does a better job on texture details than DLSS 3, being closer to DLSS 4, but it still breaks up on sparse ray traced elements due to the denoiser like DLSS 3 does. They both suffer from heavy ghosting under motion and can be very unstable, with shadows, lighting, reflections and thin subpixel elements constantly moving, popping or shifting position even when the camera is stationary, and even more so under motion, as you see here. But much of this comes from the jittered samples the engine uses within the renderer, the lack of coherent information DLSS 3 has access to or keeps in an active buffer to track and balance this frame to frame, and this is not the case with DLSS 4, with results being even more pronounced than the comparison of DLSS 3 versus FSR 2 in the same scenes, which highlights an even wider gap between this older AMD solution and this new NVIDIA transformer model, which improve ray traced effects the most across all the other two solutions, although ray reconstruction is doing a lot of the heavy lifting here again. Now, although this does come at a higher performance cost than DLSS 3 and FSR 2, in the scene for example we see an approximate 4% cost going from DLSS 4 from DLSS 3 on an RTX 5090 4K DLSS performance maximum settings with path tracing, and almost 6% from FSR 2, again 4K performance at maximum settings. So higher quality levels and lower spec older RTX GPUs, your mileage will vary. However, the small cost of power is well worth the improved visual quality and stability. The final game we had access and time to test was Star Wars Outlaws. It's a similar story here from the review build, but here we can test again the latest FSR 3 and XeSS versions and see just how close they can get to DLSS 3 and 4. Now, challenges are again similar to previous titles, namely foliage stability, some ghosting, image instability that comes from reflections, be they ray traced or screen space, shadow maps, ambient occlusion and such. Taking water bodies, trees and foliage as a starting point, we can see smaller leaps from DLSS 4 over all other solutions, although XeSS is particularly bad in this title. Anything that has sub-pixel detail simply flickers in and out of existence under XeSS, and added with ambient occlusion and reflection within the water surface, it can look pretty bad. Pixels blend together, detail is hidden by noise, and everything looks over-sharpened but hard for your eyes to define where each element stops and starts. XeSS and FSR 3 can struggle with reflection quality, with DLSS 3 and 4 offering sharper reflection quality and sharper texture and foliage. But whereas FSR 3 is softer than both DLSS solutions, with slightly more ghosting on grass and other elements, XeSS struggles with the abundant alpha, ambient occlusion and motion, as everything seems to fizzle all the time. FSR 3 does improve on this at least, and it handles the grass and trees better. Ambient occlusion is more stable, and water reflections and reflections as a whole now have more coherency with the objects they're meant to reflect. But only DLSS 3 can keep all these areas in check under motion, with better reflections generally than DLSS 3 and all the others with ray trace reflections as you see here. And it maintains a great level of detail with it all kept in focus and less egregious issues within the image quality compared to the other two solutions. Now DLSS 4 improves reflections the most. Like all tests though, this is at the performance level of DLSS 3, 4, FSR and XeSS, which renders the base game at 1920 by 1080p before upscaling that with the new transformer model, or the other solutions here, to 4K output, which is largely better than native 4K. Now balanced or quality can improve these results further, but even at this performance level, we have a largely superior image than native 4K, yet cheaper on bandwidth, memory footprint and GPU power, making it a clear winner for all RTX players to enable once the latest build goes live around the launch of the RTX 50 series of cards later this month. Now the biggest question many will have at the door is how much faster is the RTX 5090 than the RTX 4090 without any of these new solutions enabled though? Well, a pure GPU drag race. Let's rip the plaster off, band-aid for the American audience. Now depending on title to title, at 4K native or DLAA with all dials turned to 11, ray tracing enabled and DLSS and frame generation switched off, the RTX 5090 sits between 5 to 37% faster than the outgoing king in the RTX 4090. Now these were the lowest and biggest gaps I saw in my testing. That was Counter-Strike 2 and The Last of Us Part 1, respectively. Now Counter-Strike 2 is running on average into the high 300 FPS and even 400 range, and the Naughty Dog title is very demanding on PCs and VRAM. Now a jump from 76 FPS to 104 is not insignificant, as is now averaging almost 120 FPS at native 4K maximum settings, a good deal faster than the flagship of only 2 years ago, likely being related to bandwidth also. However, it is lower than the leap the RTX 4090 made over the RTX 3090, but it still leaves the RTX 5090 as the fastest GPU on the market without all the extras offered. But based on Nvidia's own statements, over 80% of the RTX owners enable DLSS. No word on how many enable frame generation, mind. The card is limited by the same 5nm node, hence the split and small PCBs, a 550 watt hike in the board power limit, and the excellent vapor chamber and dual slot pass-through cooling monoblock-like design, which is lovely. With that in mind, this new card has to change the focus far more into hardware and software designed in symbiosis to improve those diminishing returns. Now, like it or not, we have seen generation on generation in pure GPU compute per transistor returns fall. Hence why DLSS 4 and slowly frame generation is now a key USP for PC gaming and Nvidia as a whole. So much so, this new DLSS version works across the entire RTX range, meaning these tests will carry over to your RTX 20 series cards upwards and are not limited to these new range of cards only, helping their integration within games even faster.
Sa essere molto persuasivo, non è vero?
Now, although the RTX 5090 is certainly a monstrously fast GPU, the fastest on the market, delivering great performance without any of the software features Nvidia now offer, the reality is we are in a new age where temporal and upscaling solutions, both in hardware and software, are now a pivotal piece of the gaming jigsaw for developers and gamers alike. These games, particularly in Cyberpunk 2077 and Alan Wake 2, are great examples of highlighting both what DLSS 4 and other likewise solutions can and cannot do for a game's image quality. In the end, DLSS is only as good as the base information it is fed, how good the data model is for it to work from, and fundamentally that trade-off between clarity and detail versus temporal stability and ghosting. We have seen across this selection of 4 titles that in almost all key areas of image detail, stability, ghosting, and ray tracing, DLSS 4 resolves or improves most, if not all, of the prior challenges and issues in all prior DLSS versions and every other current solution available for PC and consoles alike. Given the fact that DLSS 3 was already the industry-leading solution with upsampling and frame generation, this leap from that already strong base is an eye-opener in more ways than one. This new super sampled solution can be transformative based on the small selection of games we've been able to test so far, but all current DLSS 3 games should be a simple retrofit and even possible at a driver level in the future, with 75 promised at launch. The new neural rendering technology may be the biggest leap from this generation based on the demo Nvidia showed us at the press event, reminiscent of their ray tracing promise introduced with those first RTX cards in 2018, a taste of the future that is yet to come. But Nvidia have pedigree and earned trust on delivering on those promises with the help and effort from game developers. But the promise of an improved, more stable, clearer image reconstruction is not a future promise based on these tests, but more needs to come across games and further improvements such as we saw with all prior DLSS versions. Come January 30th, don't just take my word for it, you can try it for yourself with or without an RTX 5090 5080, which is the biggest and cheapest surprise of the entire launch. And that's it for another deep dive into PC gaming